The Photowalk is a Loading Zone production.
Come to a place today called, it's close to a place called Bishop's Green, which was a town, a village that I photographed near the start of my photographic journey. I was asked to photograph a community where the houses were all being replaced by newer houses, but not everybody wanted to move out. Some really wanted to remain within these places where they'd lived all their lives. And so as I was taking and making photographs of houses that were part demolished next to houses that were still fully up with the rather reticent owners, well, reticent, that is, not to have the photographs made, but to leave the houses outside, it became quite a legacy project in many ways. And I started looking for the photographs the other day, and because I knew I wanted to come and walk here, and I can't find them. And I'm wondering because I did start out as a Windows studio and moved towards a Mac studio, and I'm just wondering whether I didn't save that particular drive properly across to the system that I currently use. I shall have a more concentrated look in the break. Anyway, here we are, Bishop's Green. It's a very frosty day. -1, temperature going down by the second. But I know not to moan about it because, as I often say, Kelly in Canada land will say to me, "Oh, get a load of this at -20 as a return picture." But let me make a photograph. The battery will undoubtedly die in the next couple of seconds due to the cold. You can hear the road in the background. I've not quite managed to escape traffic, not just yet. I'm hoping that this path will take me further into the countryside. There is, of course, as always, a plane buzzing overhead. I'm sure they do it. I'm sure they there we go. F5 shutter 1/60th, ISO 160. Oh, snap. Picture of the path ahead of me. Yeah, that plane. I'm sure that's the same one every week that comes out. Oh, is that Neil doing his photo walk? Must be time to go for a fly. Must be, huh? Well, another year, almost done on the podcast front, that is. We have this and next week's show, then that's it for 2022. There's a week's holiday for you and I from photo walking together, though I trust you'll still be exploring with your camera. And we'll be starting up again on Friday how do I get through this gate? Friday the 6th of January. There we go. Friday the 6th of January. And who knows, one of us might have a shiny new thing in our kit bag that we're very excited about from Santa. Lots of gates today. There we go, another one. Somebody went gate mad here. Who, Santa that is, according to the rumours currently circulating, he's sorting out the naughty and nice list at mpb.com HQ. Good job he has the ability to be reasonably omnipotent and omnipresent, because he has to spread his time between MPB Berlin, MPB Brooklyn, and MPB Brighton, and the North Pole, obvs. But in terms of quality used kit, mpb.com, under Santa's leadership or not, is the place to go, because if you're buying, selling or trading quality used camera kit, you can be sure you're buying camera kit that fits the description you see on the website, that it's been honestly appraised. And to make sure that happens, when the kit arrives at HQ, they're checking it once. I see where you're going, Neil. Are they checking it twice? Who knows? Maybe yes. Keeping in with the Christmas theme, they're sorting out if the person who sent it is being naughty or nice with their personal appraisal of the kit, and then if all is good, which usually it is, the team photograph it so you can see what you're actually buying. They post it on the website, and then you're buying it with a 6-month guarantee, knowing as well that you have just joined the circular economy. A nod to this time of year, and a big hearty nod to mpb.com for your continued support of this show. Now, on Monday's assignment show, I had talked of Alexander Ward being my guest, who was going to talk about wild water swimming and a project that he's making, and the fact that he's a wild water swimmer as well. Though at this point, I do want to recognise the tragic loss of 3 children in an icy lake, which has been a big news story here across the UK for the last week. It's been a story that certainly dominated our news headlines, and I know it would touch any parent especially. The terrible event is not about wild water swimming, but I just felt I'd hold it over for another week, and really because there are some, I suppose, more frivolous moments within the interview that I had. Though I appreciate most topics, certainly the harder news ones that we talk about, and today we have some hard issues within our conversation. There's never really a good week, but it was just a feeling about that particular conversation, which will air next week. So this week, Erin Trieb on photojournalism, and in particular her observational work in Ukraine, which is just outstanding. As the anniversary approaches of the invasion in the new year, I've been looking forward to talking with Erin for quite some time, and we never really found the right opportunity. So today is that day. She was there as the tanks rolled in. She had a hunch. She was there before the invasion, and so we talk about that. And I'm also moved by her work to help others have a voice, not solely through the pictures she makes and stories she shares with the world through her work, but physically through one particular exhibition we'll talk about, which features others' contributions. And if there were ever a postscript to a show, today is that moment. It's just one of those times I'm pleased we went back to roll tape, as they say, some more, because Erin will lead us out into the play-out song today with a postscript. So a multi-layered story today, because whilst there'll be a fair amount of time dedicated to her work in Ukraine, Erin's personal story and reasons to do what she does really does impress upon me that there are some very special humans with cameras in this world.
Today on the Photowalk.
I mean, imagine if there weren't any journalists and if there were no images to illustrate what was happening around the world. We would all be not only just living in the dark, but have very little consciousness of what other people are going through. So I like to consider that I'm a part of a collective for a force of good.
Stories of life told by photographers, and today we're joined as we walk by Erin Trieb. It's a unique and special kind of photography show. Unique because it's made by and from the letters you send in about what making pictures means to you, and special because we get to spend time together making our photos while the letters and guests inspire with thoughts about photography and life. Whatever you photograph with, a pro-grade camera or humble smartphone, it's a show about how making pictures has you feel, what it does for us and others around us. And with 6.6 billion people on this planet able to make photographs with something, we're not walking alone. In the mailbag today, we're in gratitude mode for you and preparing for a year ahead, making stories of the ones we most love. We're finding photographic gold on our home turf, being retrospective about the year just gone, an appeal for your pictures in 23, and raising a glass to those we meet who share their stories for our lens. So, shall we walk then? The penultimate one for 22. Coffee, Garibaldi's. Are they packed? Check. Boots on and laced? Check. Spare batteries? Check. Geolocation logging app activated? Check. Memory cards or spare film? Check. Earbuds in? Check. Lens caps off. Let's walk.
Crunch, crunch, crunch. There's no mud. That'll make Carl happy. It's too crunchy for mud. Where do we start this week? Simone Miles, good to hear from you. It's been ages, Simone. Where have you been? You don't phone, you don't message, you don't... Well, you have, actually. you have written. Neil, with a year-end approaching, I wanted to send in a letter of gratitude myself, since the podcast has kept me entertained in 2022. It's been wonderful to follow the changes, and I certainly like the way it's become the Photowalk officially as a title as well. Well, you're very kind. Thank you very much. If, by the way, I appear to be out of breath, it's because there's a bit of a north blowing wind as well. Thicker jacket was required today. But Simone says, before you go and hide behind something as you suggest you do when flattery shows its face, this isn't so much a thank you note to you, though take it as read, I do appreciate your efforts. This is a mail to thank those who've written in and inspired me personally with their photography and with their stories, but most of all with their candour. I'm constantly surprised by those who share the most personal of stories, and it feels to me often not so much a podcast, but a room where we've met up as friends and it felt safe to talk about our travels, sometimes our troubles too. Hearing Kieran Doherty talk about his parents this year was the highlight for me in a year where we learned about the fragility of my father, who, without getting too personal, is now diagnosed formally with dementia. I'm sorry to hear about that, Simone. Yeah, that's tough news. This episode was hard in many respects, but hearing his love, hearing and seeing his story about his father has galvanised my thoughts about making my photo story now. There'll be many challenges to come in 2023, of that I have no doubt, but I now take my camera every time we go and see Dad and have started to build the most important album I think I ever will. So thank you to your guests, and a big thank you to the letter writers you have, and I'm pleased to have found this special room to hang out with friends. Although I must just ask, was it you who brought mud in on his boots? Looks very much like your footprint, Neil. Oh, you sound like Car. Thank you, Simone. I appreciate your words and your sentiment, and I'll echo your thoughts in terms of finding what I think I'll now consider as our room. And best wishes rather as you move forward in 2023 and make these photo stories of your own. If you do feel like sharing some pictures, then please feel free. But honestly, it's a very personal story, so I'll leave that up to you. And then Steve Bennett sent in a letter quite some time back as it goes, but it fits so well in terms of an end-of-year letter looking ahead to photo projects in the new year too. And as we step along the last few paths, he says poetically, of 22 walks, the travel restrictions that to an extent still haunted us at the start of the year, didn't they? I know that it seems like it was so long ago, but at the start of 22, I remember thinking that our time we were about to spend for a week in Norway in February could be thwarted by the virus that shall not be mentioned. And there was still talk, actually, that summer holidays could have some serious travel hiccups. And we were seeing the edge of the woods, so to speak, but the spectre of the virus that I do not wish to mention it still loomed large. Steve Bennett, though, has found some creative freedom, unexpectedly maybe, but he did find some. And I suppose we're looking for things that came out of this dreadful period of history. There are some sort of, well, in Steve's case, green shoots of creative freedom that some of us found. Neil, says Steve, mentioning that my photography mojo was suffering due to travel restrictions that we had is almost as much a cliche as being the aforementioned introverted photographer. But looking back now, being forced to shoot locally over the last few years may well have been just what I needed. You see, it removed the pressure of getting an image and allowed me to experiment more. As such, I moved away from chasing that one great image. That unicorn is never quite the same shade of white, and started to think in terms of collections rather than single images. It started small, but a short series formed around these pictures, and I popped these, by the way, onto the show page today, of course. And although these images will probably remain just for me, it was clear that the dark, creative hole I thought I was in was actually a gold mine. Let me explain for you one of the pictures on the show page. It's a photograph made through the underside structure of a seaside pier, which are, this might sound strange, I, like Steve, find them quite magical wherever you are in the world. When you go underneath a pier, it's almost like you're not supposed to be there. It's the forbidden zone under a pier. I remember in Daytona, there was a jazz band playing underneath their pier. So Steve has sent in his black and whites of the underside of a pier. Steve says, following this picture underneath a pier, I pulled together a larger collection that I self-published into a 72-page book called Among Piers that celebrates the structure of the far from salubrious underside of the pier at Southend-on-Sea. So I'm gathering by this is where you live. And this is a structure that you're quite familiar with. Steve, there's photographic gold everywhere, isn't there? There really is. Who'd have thought the underside of a pier would be that photographic gold? But it is. It is. You've told stories of the underside of the pier. It's a wonderful project, and I'm pleased to share the picture on the show page today. So that period of history, which still is not very welcome, it has brought you some photographic experience and experiences that you otherwise might not have encountered. Right, some inspiration. I nearly went to a guest who talked about his pier project to us over a year ago, Chris Waddell. I've visited that project recently on the show as well. Actually, it was probably nearer 2020, thinking about it. Was it the winter of 2020? But no, I'm going to play you a few words from Kieran Doherty since he was mentioned, because I think his impact in terms of creative and certainly the emotional has been really potent this year. And I'll dedicate this to you, Simone Miles, as you make your pictures of Dad in 2023.
I mean, there were so many reasons for doing this story, because during COVID, obviously all my work just dried up. And I just thought, what am I going to do? I mean, what am I going to do? And mainly it was mainly from a creative perspective. What am I going to do? And if I can't be creative, you just know it's just going to begin to affect your mental health. And so I started shooting these pictures, and it's really interesting, because everybody thinks, I mean, it is a deeply personal story, and they are my parents. And so you are trying to tell their story in a way that's not too biased because I'm their son, but in a way that, is very truthful. So I made a conscious decision at the very beginning that, listen, this is going to be how I normally operate as a photographer. If I miss it, I miss it. Yeah. And goodness me, have I missed plenty of pictures that have happened. Even in my own home that I sort of grew up in as a kid, I'm still now trying to figure out places where I should leave my cameras so that if something happens, I can grab it and I can take a picture. So, that was the main, and a lot of it was centered around Dad, because he was obviously the most vulnerable. They were both classified as medically vulnerable. Yeah. But it sort of centered on him because, it was really my mum looking after him. And then I realised, how important my mum is to this story. And that's the easy thing to forget. And my mum's not one for she's not interested in, people seeing her or what she does. She's a very humble woman, and she just basically gets on and she looks after my dad. And I just began to think, you know what, Mum, you're as important in this story. It's about the two of you. It's not about Dad, even though a lot of the images around Dad were the ones that made the sort of the pictures. And so when I sort of crossed that, then that just opened up a whole other sort of palette on landscape to be able to photograph, because then I was looking for the interactions between the two of them and the moments between the two of them, and it wasn't all just centered on Dad. And that's what I've basically been trying to do now. And it's effectively, all it was going to be was a diary for the family, so that generations of our family could see what their great-great-great-grandparents went through during COVID, because I didn't think no matter what happens to us in the time that we leave the earth, nothing will be quite the same as 2020.
The voice of Kieran Doherty talking about his special project with his parents. It's been quite the year, walking and talking physically with some of my guests. Oh, I'd love a teleporter. Just to get around the world would be fabulous, wouldn't it? But I'll carry on in the new year in 2023, walking and talking with guests where I can, of course, physically be in touch with them. But otherwise, the power of Zoom. Prior to the pandemic, I'd seen Zoom adverts on telly and heard them on radio. But I'd not considered it was something I would necessarily use. I had Skype. I thought, I've got Skype. Why do I want Zoom? What's Zoom for? What possible use could I have with that Zoom thing? How history changes opinion, huh? Kieran Doherty, he definitely was, and I know Simone said, a highlight of the year for you, Simone, in listening terms. And I can promise you this, it was a highlight of my year, being able to walk with him. And one thing I remember from at the end of the walk that we had when we recorded his interview, his mother had invited us back to the house for traditional tea and cake. Victoria sponge, very traditional, all good and proper, where this incredible photo story that he made during lockdown and still continues to make about the two of them is being photographed. It felt a bit like walking onto a TV or a film set, a place you're very familiar with because of the photographs. Small things like the detail in the kitchen worktop and the cups and the saucers. It's things like that strike you immediately. Such is the power of detail in a photograph. I've learned from Kieran and other photographers this year just how important it is to photograph detail. Those details are absolute photographic gold. They really are. Photographing your kitchen worktop might not seem like something you need to do, but do it. In 20 years' time, you'll be saying, Neil was right, Yeah, do you remember that kitchen worktop? I've perhaps chosen the strangest of examples, but I know you know what I mean. Right, let's get another sketchbook image. Put your letters down here. Oh, good job. The camera's working well with my gloves. I do not want to take them off. Very cold-looking photographs today. It's a cloudless sky. Oh, there are some clouds, but it's featureless, that's for sure. I'm using my X100V today. I knew that if I brought out a manual camera, my hands would be on show, and they'd probably freeze. They'd probably freeze to the camera itself. So 1/2/5. Oh, it's darkened off a bit actually. ISO 1000. F5. Here we go. The path that lays out in front of me. I was looking the other day through all the pictures that I've made. I've got hundreds upon hundreds this year of my sketchbook images of the paths that I've trod. Prior to doing this Photowalk show with you, I didn't have... honestly, I probably had a dozen, 2 dozen, and then add on top of that, from walks and trips out, that is, and add on top of that pictures from holiday. But making this Photowalk with you has been very revealing. Here's a letter from Christopher Parsons, who is responding to something we did on the Extra Mile Zoom last week. I can't say my words. Extra Mile Zoom. Thank you, last week, where I asked extra milers to look for pictures that essentially said 2022. 3 pictures that weren't necessarily the the best from the year. That's not what it was about. It was more about pictures that that summed up a year of picture making or a personal story. It was quite wide open, really, but it was about 2022 and the changes, perhaps, that the year rang in. And there were a few that really did talk of freedom in their compositions. Neil Ford's, for example. You know Neil. He who knows everything technical that frankly washes through and over my little brain. His three were photographs of events coming back in 2022. Neil is a very good event photographer, and he takes part in, we have Park Run. Do you have Park Run in other parts of the world? In the UK, we have something called Park Run, which happens, I think it's every Saturday, isn't it? Or is it generally at the weekends? I know it's 9 a.m. up at the airbase, where we've walked on the Photowalk a few times. But Neil photographs events. And for him, 2022 very much was the year that the events came back and he could start photographing again. So those images I will share on the show page today. But this one is from Chris Parsons. Hello, Neil. Sent you a note about something you encouraged the extra milers to do. You'd suggested that we go and look for a picture or three that really speaks of 2022. I have to say that it was actually quite a neat experience. I spent a good couple of hours going through many of the images that I've made over the course of the year, which resurfaced a lot of images and moments that I like but hadn't looked at recently. Typically, my method to sort through a year's worth of photos is to review images that I posted to social media, which this year has been Glass. We talked about Glass a bit, haven't we? For me, Glass looks like a fabulous social media platform, but it's one more. And I've sort of adopted Vero on top of Insta this year. That is one of my resolutions. What do we call resolutions? Statements, wishes, desires, things that you forget by the 3rd of January, 3:30 in the afternoon. But I intend to do far more with Vero in Instagram this year. It's something I really, really do need to improve upon for my own social photography business. So there we go. Statement made publicly to you, but Glass is as good as it looks. Just seemed to be one more that I probably would not have found time to do, but it does look a very, very good platform. From the 300 to 365 images or so that I post, I worked it down to 30 pictures that best tell the story of the year. However, using this process, I missed some photos that I really like but haven't uploaded, and at the same time include some images in the sort that I've found, I've fallen out of favour with since posting them. All of which is to say, I think that going through and taking the time to review and re-examine the images that we make over a year is a really good exercise. And especially because there's a bit of time between when an image was captured and now. For me, at least, this helped to surface work that resonates more today than I think it did when I first made it. I wonder what you and your other listener do in reviewing your own images to compose annual albums or collections. Sadly, I couldn't make it to the Zoom meetup. You were missed. You were. But wanted to share the 3 photos I'd have presented, all of which were taken this year, and are meant to reflect how much things have changed in Toronto over the course of the year in terms of the pandemic. Yeah, one of the, there's 2 images like it actually, of theatres with solitary folk outside, and the theatres looking really quite sad and closed. Fantastic images. Do see them on the show page today. He's explained them, though, written a little bit of each, just in case you're looking at the pictures on the website as you're listening to this. Till Pandemic Does Us Part speaks to how seriously some were still taking things much earlier in the year. That's the first image. They kind of pass by in a carousel, left to right. The final image of the year in this set, Amour, is meant to document how things are today, with those in love able to see and hold one another amongst crowds once more. As a set, I think they have a symmetry and story and composition across them. Anyhow, thanks again for the prompt to go through and look at past photos. Those pictures will be on the show page today, episode 360. And a reminder that I set the assignment Monday just gone. It was, I thought I should take a turn. And it really was on the theme that we've mentioned here. So I'm hoping Christopher's story would inspire you to take part in this week's assignment. See, he did a chattering teeth. Episode 359. An image or three, if you can muster three, fantastic. One is good enough, though, that says 2022. Because it's been for many probably the biggest transition of, both feelings and rules since the virus I shall not mention came into our lives. Right. Whew. Left or right? What do you think? Right? Through the woods then. Here we go. Just now, a jogger ran past. Pretty much the thinnest clothes you could possibly wear. He did a hearty hello as he ran past. I thought, are you a mirage in the cold? Are you for real? Surely nobody can be this happy with that thin layer of clothing and this cold. Oh, Neil, you do go on about the cold. I have to say, every year I've been getting slightly more Basil Fawlty about it in terms of the cold. Probably not helped by friends of mine that do live in Africa and places that say, oh, it's beautiful today. Send me pictures of them sitting out there on their sun loungers. Right, let's get a picture. I'm in the woods. Let's call this one sparse or cold. One of the two. I tell you what, the battery on the X100V, it was fully charged when I came out. We are down to, it can't have been fully charged because we're down to just 2 bars now. F4, shooting through the trees, leafless trees. A sketchbook of where we are today. Just pick my letters up again. Where were we? Thank you for all your entries. I just had a big thank you here written. Thank you for all your entries into the 2022 listener survey, which has now closed. It was, really revealing in places, particularly some of the comments. And I had to make sure I had my, is the phrase big boy pants on? Or is that something very dodgy? I don't know. I often get those sort of things wrong. My eldest, Jack, my 14-year-old, would say, oh, Dad, you're so uncool in it, bruv, for not knowing that big boy pants meant something completely different, probably, yeah. Anyway, yes, you were very brutally honest in some places. I know, I did ask for it. I did say, if you have any other comments, there's what I call a free-for-all place within the survey. One word that seems to have stuck with me, and I won't name check you, clearly, because you are quite a good friend of the show, but one thing that's definitely stuck with me, that's now been adopted by the whole family since I read it out at dinner time, was the fact that I blather on too much. Sometimes I'm blathering. Still don't quite understand what you mean by that. Is this blathering now? Because I see it as just walking along. We used to call it chuntering, which I'm sure probably means something else, but just chatting away. What does Mally call it? What does the man of the trees call it? He says, Mally, what do you say? There's a word you have for just walking along, chatting. See, I see you there with me. Oh, you're here. No, hang on, you're here. Just there, with me. And that's why I chat along. I tell you what, it does sound strange. I think if somebody comes upon me the other way and I'm chatting to myself like I'm chatting with you, but that's the way I see it. But yeah, blathering, that's one of the comments. Get over it, Neil. Yes, I shall. The checkboxes about how long you'd like the show to be and where the assignments show should live for the next year in particular were conclusive with a capital K. And so a few tweaks are in order for the new year. The first photo walk being after the break, yes, on the 6th of January. I like to think all good tweaks. I've listened very hard to things that you've said. Is that the right expression? Now you're blathering, Neil. Oh, probably yes. I'm still compiling final findings into a clever sort of spreadsheet that probably only Neil of Ford will understand. But after that, I can tell you about it on next week's show. And Extra Milers, your new Wednesday show, well, that's going to have a few spankingly brand new things that you should hopefully enjoy, which is going to make it rather unique. Dad, don't use the word spankingly. You is so embarrassing. Please drop me around the corner. Don't hoot and wave as you drive off. Right, time to meet Erin Trieb for the first of two parts of a conversation today that will be... I know the J word is used a lot talking about photography, but until I can find a better one, I'm going to continue using it. This is a real journey in terms of story making in challenging environments. And there are some, very personal thoughts about well-being and mental health with... as I say, there's a postscript to the show today that certainly underlines some of the thoughts and notions that you're going to hear coming up in today's interview from today's guest. Incidentally, in the checkbox area within the survey that I was mentioning a moment ago, the type of photographers you enjoy hearing from the most, photojournalists. That was far out a leader. So it's an absolute pleasure to bring you today Erin Trieb.
If you can, then do. It's your mantra, Erin. I want to remember this as we talk, because so many of the subjects that meet the focus of your camera have to overcome uphill struggles that I know I couldn't even comprehend. And you must meet the most extraordinary people at the most extraordinary of times, which has to have changed your personal outlook on life, hasn't it?
It has. I mean, throughout my whole life, I've been incredibly lucky and privileged to get to travel the world and meet all sorts of people from different backgrounds and cultures and societies, and it's something that I wanted to do since I was a kid. So getting to live my dream job, it's really a blessing. And I feel very honored to be able to do this line of work.
Now, I didn't know this time last week we were going to be chatting, but if I had known, I had a particular day where everything went wrong, Erin. The computer went wrong. I had to replace, I call it brain. I had to replace brain again and various other technical things that happened. Had I known I was talking to you, I would have thought, well, I'd be more like Erin. # be like Erin, because I would imagine you don't sweat the small stuff.
That's such a compliment. Thank you. And I don't want to deter your audience in the wrong way. I would say # don't be like me in a lot of situations, because I definitely experience stress on different levels. It's a weird thing, because my experience of stress is very strange, even though I've been investigating it and inspecting it and working through it in therapy for, almost 20 years. It definitely doesn't have any warning signs. So I don't know. I mean, for me, I don't stress the small things. It's kind of almost like a buildup, and then I implode. So I don't know. Maybe it's like good because I have a semi-high tolerance, but then it's bad because when it hits its threshold, I'm kind of done.
Right. A wonderful producer I had the pleasure of learning under in my formative days at the BBC said, your opening question can be thought of as the book jacket opener. In other words, the question that establishes who you are with lots of immediacy. But after studying your work and reading about you, I would need a big book jacket cover. Why have you chosen to dedicate your life to the subject matter that you do? I know you said you're passionate. I know you said it was your dream job. for many people, it wouldn't necessarily be their dream, the places that you go to.
Yeah, I, from a young age, felt like I had a calling to some sort of line of service. A lot of people don't know this about me, but I grew up very, very religious, not because of my parents. I, as a child, found, my own sense of spirituality. And we went to church like I would say the average American family did back in the 90s, but it wasn't ingrained or impressed upon me in any way. I just became very devout and a very serious Christian, and I wanted to be a missionary. And I always felt this calling. I can recall times when I was in grade school when my mother and I would go out and feed the homeless or volunteer at homeless shelters. And so I feel like I learned at a very young age the importance of service and, reaching out to marginalized populations, maybe populations that don't either their voice is being stifled or they're not having as much of a megaphone to get their story out. And so, I think, for just most of my life, that was just something I was passionate about, something I learned from a young age. And I wanted to be a missionary. I wanted to be in the service of others. And then I went to college. And then, after about 10 years of being devoutly religious, my beliefs changed because I read a lot of philosophy, as one does, And I realized that my calling wasn't necessarily religiously geared after all. It was to be in some sort of service or, social calling to either, I don't want to say that I help others, but I'm drawn to stories and situations where there is an element of human suffering, whether that's, social issues or war or conflict. It's just always been something in my life that I felt like I needed to see and witness and be a part of and hopefully contribute, in some small positive way towards the alleviation of suffering of others. I don't want to make it sound like photojournalism or the type of work I do is any sort of heroic feat, because I don't think it is. I think firefighters and nurses and engineers and people who, rebuild cities after they've been torn down from war I don't know. I mean, I feel like they're the true heroes of that world.
Do you still have a semblance of that original faith? And I wonder whether if you did, whether the scenes that you've seen and the things that you've experienced might have challenged that anyway.
No, it wasn't my experience in conflict that challenged that. Well, it was traveling for sure. I went on a mission trip when in 1999. I was 17. I just graduated from high school, and I went on a mission trip with a group to Africa.
Yeah.
I thought we were going to be doing service work, volunteer work, helping at hospitals, helping at orphanages, things like that.
Yeah.
And it ended up being a fundamentalist group that later was recognized as a cult and got shut down about 5 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago. They were called Teen Mania, and they were in the woods in East Texas, and at like a very strange compound. Yeah, I went to Africa with them, and that was the seed that I think was planted that really was sort of I don't want to call it a downward spiral. It was the deviation of my faith and belief system.
There's a particular kind of motivation, though, isn't there, required to make pictures that take you to challenging places, both, physically and mentally. I wouldn't imagine for a moment it can ever be a learned experience before you start. I'm keen to know who or what prepared you for this, be that experience passed on by others or inspiration from photographers you've read about or those that whose work you've followed? Yeah,
as a teenager, I was obsessed with the photographers who worked at Life magazine, and I memorized this book called What They Saw, and it was all the greats like Shelley and Carl Meidens, Eisenstadt, all the Life staffers that were photographing predominantly World War II and the Vietnam War. And I pored over that type of work. And there was a moment I had in college that was literally like a light bulb going off, where I was at an exhibit of images from the Holocaust. And I wrote down in my journal, I didn't even really know what a photojournalist was at this point, but I wrote down in my journal, if I can take images of human events, of human tragedy, of human suffering with my camera. That's what I want to do for the rest of my life.
In the 20 years then that you've been doing it, what's essentially changed in terms of, I was going to ask how easy or tough it is to find the gigs, because I know you have to be a business person. And that's certainly a juggling act when you're abroad. We're going to talk about Ukraine in a moment. I mean, while you're in Ukraine, there isn't just the day-to-day of living and working, of photographing and getting picture stories back, etc. There's the business of it as well. And in that 20 years, what's changed, Erin?
Oh, a lot. When I joined the industry, everyone said, it's the downfall of the industry and it's going to fizzle out in the next couple of years. And while it didn't, because that was back in 2004 when I graduated from college and then started stringing for newspapers, it didn't collapse all at once. It's been kind of a slow drip in terms of the amount of work that's available to freelancers, the amount of work that's even available to staff photographers at papers. I mean, there's been hundreds of layoffs over the past 2 decades. It's really difficult now, I think, to make a living as a freelancer. Yeah. It's definitely been challenging for me. I think most of the stories I do now, I pitch myself, which I think helps give me a little bit of the negotiating power, since the idea comes from my side, and then I can, present it and then hopefully get it commissioned. But yeah, it's not easy. A lot of my colleagues have sort of veered towards the direction of more commercial gigs because they tend to pay better.
Well, I do want to look further back into your archive and projects, so let's start with Ukraine. And it was a little while back that I contacted you first. This has been a conversation in the making for quite a while, I think, Erin. And I saw you talk about Ukraine recently. You said it's one of the more difficult assignments because you still hadn't been entirely able to comprehend the full why about Ukraine. It's a very different war, you said, to covering conflict in the Middle East. And I wondered why you thought that.
Yeah, there's a few reasons. I think the first is that a lot of the places that I've covered war before, such as Iraq and Afghanistan, have, I would say, corrupt governments to the effect that getting into and out of situations actually can be easier because of that corruption. For instance, in Iraq, if you happen to know the right people in the military, or you have a friend who's Iraqi who happens to know the right people in the military, you can get past checkpoints. And it sucks for Iraq and Iraqis because the corruption that exists actually, in a weird way, makes our job somewhat easier. If it's not as tight in terms of regulations and rules. Whereas Ukraine, a fully functioning, democratic, Western country, Western society, working infrastructure. I mean, it was a completely autonomous democratic country, right?
Yeah.
Everything's working. So the regulations are much more difficult at times to get past. So for instance, in Ukraine, when Bucha was under attack and there was intense fighting between Russian and Ukrainian troops, journalists could only go to a certain point before we were turned back. Whereas, in Iraq, you could drive right up to the front lines, get out of your car, and then proceed on foot, often being able to document the actual conflict within somewhat close proximity. And in Ukraine, it was just impossible. I saw more fighting footage on television than I did in person. And what was even stranger is that I could see it. I could see the lights from the bombs and the missiles outside of my window on my balcony at my hotel in Kyiv. And then I could see it on the television, but I couldn't see it in person. And that was really frustrating.
It's a very surreal kind of existence as well.
It was bizarre.
Yeah.
It was.
Yeah. The pictures were extraordinary. You were there right at the start, and some of those very first images you took were almost pandemic-like, empty streets, nothing going on, and then suddenly it all happens. There's a pace to this that is quite extraordinary as well, isn't there?
There is, yes. It was almost immediate.
And then taking yourself into those stations, how do you position yourself as a photojournalist when you're watching what was essentially families separating? Because that must have been exceptionally emotional.
It's strange. I feel like I must have had my emotional guard up because I wasn't, obviously you feel feelings and you feel empathy, but I wasn't really jarred until I was at the exhumation in Bucha, with the bodies being extracted from the ground, from the mass grave, and then that's when it really hit home. But yeah, I was trying, I guess, maybe subconsciously trying to stay stoic so that I didn't crumble. I wear my heart on my sleeve and my emotions on my sleeve, and I'll probably even tear up while we're talking, just, thinking about the memories. But yeah, I remember the man, it was when this man named Vladimir had been looking for his brother for several weeks, and he came to the mass grave at I think it was St. Peter's Church. He came to the grave site and, recognized that it was his brother's body. And that sense of not relief, but, it was just this weight he had been carrying for weeks, wondering. And then the gravity of knowing and seeing his brother's body that had been, either tortured or I think he might have been executed, and watching Vladimir's response, that's when I lost it. And I just had to sit down and kind of take a break, and my hands were shaking because I could my heart just broke for him and hurt,
Was that the picture of him with his wife being consoled by what I think is his wife?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. Anger must be another thing that I know I would find myself. I think I would find myself as quite angry. And I wonder, all those emotions that you can have, disappointment, empathy, sympathy, anger, do all of these play out? Or as you said, you had to bottle it slightly, which of course isn't necessarily conducive to mental well-being, is it?
No, it's not. And it's, it's tricky because you have to somewhat keep it in for a time being to be able to function and keep doing your job. Because if you're in a heap of tears all the time, you can't keep photographing, and you're really not doing the situation at hand justice. No. You kind of have to put on a brave face and put on your emotional armor to get back out there and keep shooting, keep photographing to tell these stories because they need to be told. Yeah. And then, there is a time when I think for me, I feel it and I'm like, okay, now's a day when I need a break and I need to release this and have a moment. And maybe that means crying, on the floor in my hotel room. Maybe it means calling a friend and talking to them about it. But yeah, definitely, keeping it inside for weeks and weeks at a time is also not healthy. And then, people also have, there's other ways to cope that are unhealthy, like numbing it with alcohol or drugs, or, unfortunately, I think people do turn to those coping mechanisms because it's just so painful.
The ferocity has been truly horrific to witness, and is still ongoing, of course. The job is to show this without the audience, as it were, becoming complacent in any way. How do you do that? How do those still there do it? Because what you don't want, and this is a horrible word, but it's the word I've used or heard used rather in relation to Ukraine, that you don't want your audience to somehow become fatigued by this war.
That's a great question, and I wish I had a solid answer for you. It's one that I still deal with on the job and struggle with and try to do my best at. I did find that a lot of folks back home when I was in Ukraine were really interested in normal everyday life. I mean, they said, okay, we're seeing the atrocities coming out of Ukraine, but what about kids going to school? How are they going to school? What about teenagers? Are they still meeting up? Do they keep in touch by texting if everybody's indoors, if there's a curfew? And so I was really heartened by a lot of people's input. I would even get text messages or DMs over Instagram from just followers who were like, we want to see this, we want to see that. That was still 3 months in, and now we're close to 10 months in, and it does become quite the challenge to keep the topic refreshed and gain people's attention and keep this in front of people, because people do become fatigued, unfortunately.
It's really interesting when you said the human nature of what people were requesting, who's texting each other, how are the youth staying in touch, what are they doing, does life carry on? My wife asked, she said, well, what happens to all the pets? But these are all human stories, aren't they?
I mean, and the best place to see that was at the train station, because I saw a woman with a pet pig.
Yeah.
We saw people with fish, birds, reptiles. I mean, and they... Ukrainians were just as dog crazy as Americans or, any other pet loving country. They refused to leave their animals at home. So it was like a happy story, because you knew that the animals were going to get to be with their families and be taken care of.
Well, I do want to come back to that word, actually, but you said happy and hope. I mean, there's two H words there. There's a lot of your work is about hope, isn't it? This is not hopelessness. This is hope as well.
It is. And that was a really important side to the story, an angle of the story that I felt we needed to cover, because with every atrocity, with every horror we were witnessing, there was this juxtaposition of a miracle happening, or people just chipping in and really going to bat for their fellow countrymen. And that was extraordinary to see. I've never seen a country mobilize as quickly as the Ukrainians did and get to work to support their country when the invasion happened. It was like watching a symphony be directed in perfect unison. I mean, it was really inspiring.
Dignity is obviously important as well, maintaining somebody's dignity. And perhaps we go back to the photograph, the extraordinary photograph you took of the gentleman that had lost his brother. Maintaining dignity, especially during somebody's most difficult moments, is, I would imagine, a very difficult balancing act.
I mean, that's correct. It's our job to make sure that we maintain the dignity within the story and the dignity of the subjects. I think that's a huge responsibility, and it's one that I take very seriously, because these are people's lives, their most important, vulnerable, life-changing moments. And it's our job to do right by them.
Has that side of your work changed dramatically since the Erin of 20 years ago and the Erin of today?
Yeah, I mean, when I started out and I was young and naive and still learning, I was much more prone to kind of push my way to the front or do whatever was needed to get that picture. I was really hungry and ambitious. Now, I just turned 40 this summer, and in my wise old age, I think, not being the first is not only okay, but standing back and taking time is really important. I've learned to hang back a little bit more, and I think that's a really good lesson. You can see more when you stand, when you hang back. You can see what's unfolding. It's important to learn how to maneuver in those spaces, and I think how I go about my work, it's matured.
I make no apologies for those listening who've heard me ask this in various guises, but it's genuinely a question that is at the heart of my inquisitiveness when I talk to photographers who make the stories you do. McCullin has said that he fears he didn't change the world through his pictures, that there is still war, that there is still famine, there is still suffering, that despite bringing pictures to an audience that are moved by what they see of his, it's still not been enough to stop those in power inflicting the misery in the first place, that he fears he hasn't changed the world. And I do wonder whether that's at the heart of the reason why you photograph what you do, that Erin can in some way, however large or modest, somehow change the world for the better.
No, not really. And, I've heard Don McCullin speak, and I have the greatest respect for him. I mean, he's one of the greatest of all times, and his work was absolutely fundamental in changing the worldview and perspectives during the Vietnam War. So, but I with all due respect, I don't agree with him. And I've heard him voice those opinions several times. And I don't know where that comes from for him. It could be guilt that he carries around, which is, I mean, that's expected. And yeah, I mean, that's a really heavy burden. He probably went through the worst of it. I don't, I think when I started, I definitely had the idea that I was going to change the world. And I don't really see it that way anymore. I kind of see myself as a brick on a stone path, or one voice in a choir of 1,000 voices, if that makes sense. It's a collected effort, I think. I mean, imagine if there weren't any journalists and if there were no images to illustrate what was happening around the world. We would all be not only just living in the dark, but have very little consciousness of what other people are going through. So I like to consider that I'm a part of a collective for a force of good. And I don't know if my pictures have changed public opinion or not. I do know that the relationships I've developed with subjects that I photographed has been critical to my life, and I'd like to think that they value their relationship with me. That's been stunning. That's not something I ever really understood or knew or was expecting when I first started my career, that I developed these really intimate relationships with some of my subjects, and that we'd stay in touch for 10, 15 years. I just did a podcast the other day with a medic who I was embedded with his platoon over 10 years ago, and getting to talk to him. He's now a father of 2 kids, and I think he was 20 when I met him. And just getting to talk with him and talk about some of those shared experiences that we had in Afghanistan together was really a meaningful, just a meaningful, thing that we got to do.
And Erin Trieb returns soon for part 2. It's the photo walk of a Friday, the penultimate one of this year. We did take a week's break over the Christmas into New Year holiday, and then we're back on the 6th of January. As I've mentioned already, I've noticed the mailbag, by the way, looking for the first time a little devoid of your pictures. It's got some super notes and short stories in there. They're continuing, and thank you so much for sending them in. But let's have your pictures too. I'm genuinely fascinated by where you live in the world because, I suppose to me and others, my other listener in particular, your normal is our adventure. And note to self, remember that one. It sounds like something you should have on the front of the website. Your normal is our adventure. So, send your pictures and your stories to stories@photowalk.show. If you're sending pictures 2,000 pixels wide, a very good point was made, actually, in the listener survey, since we've now mentioned it, that in the form itself, there is no place to send in a picture. So you do find, or you will find, if you're looking on a website, just to the left, you'll see the hyperlink to an email address. If you're on a smaller device like an iPad or something, I believe that hyperlink is above the form, but that's where you can send your pictures in from. So yes, please, pictures, photographs as we head into 2023. What does your part of the world look like? Because whilst there's me yaffling along here, not yaffling, Neil, blathering. While I'm blathering along here, along this path, then I know I'm saying, "Oh, cold! It's cold. My fingers are freezing. I can't make the f-stop work." I'm completely aware that it's not like that across the world. Australia and New Zealand, of course, being a fine example of that. So yeah, do please keep sending in your pictures to stories@photowalk.show. Stories@photowalk.show. Right, my thanks to our extra milers, those who walk and go the extra photo walk mile to support this show with a modest monthly or annual donation, which means your kindness and your amazingness goes toward paying for the music licensing and the hosting and the studio costs and all those other running outgoings that exist for anybody that podcasts. I know sometimes I think podcasting is seen as something that, you do that out your back bedroom, don't you? That costs nothing. Lift up a microphone, yaffle for a bit, not going to use the other word. And you're done, sorted, bish bash bosh, put it on, away you go. No, it takes, I like to think, I know you do, my other listener doesn't always appreciate it, I know, but I know you do. The show takes a lot longer to put together. So thank you sincerely to those who really do enjoy it, listen, and then join the patronage, which we call the Extra Mile. I appreciate it so much. The extra podcast made for you each week is moving in the new year to Wednesdays, and I'm pleased to say it's going to be a show all of its own. Well, it's always been a show, but now it's going to become something a bit more akin to this, actually, to complement the Friday show. Some new features in there. We'll be meeting extra milers who have their own stories to tell. There'll be a new Off the Beaten Track feature, which gives me a chance to tell and share stories that aren't so photographic. Hence Off the Beaten Track. Is it off the beaten path or off the beaten track? It's different in different countries. Please tell me. Email in, let me know. Before I have Mel make a voiceover for it. Books are coming back. Yeah, books are coming back, and there's a few other ideas that I'm working on. This Sunday, we have our Extra Mile edition as it is at the moment, and my guest today, Erin, shares a story about a very special person and a very tough decision. It's a life-shaping moment, and I discussed the life-shaping moment that Erin shared with me with my very good friend Giles over a much warmer coffee before coming out for the Photowalk today. But atop the story that Erin shared, there was a moment where I thought, oh my word, I've been through that as well. Not quite the same as Erin's, but it'll become much clearer on the Extra Mile this weekend. But it's a personal story I didn't imagine I'd be sharing with Erin. And I thought, well, shall I share both of those? And I'm going to. With Erin's blessing, we're going to take out the name of the person she's talking about. I can't do the same for my own, but it'll be clear why not. But that's coming up on Sunday. We get right personal, as Mally would say, on Sunday. And because I like you to meet our extra milers, here's a note from a good friend of the show, Bob Demers in Arizona land, who from this moment hence, I've decided, has earned a title now. Bob of the Desert. Because where you are, Bob, it never seems to get cold. Hi, Neil, he writes. I just wanted to let you know I'm still enjoying your podcast. That sounds like you're about to say despite. I kind of felt guilty after you mentioned that your US friends lapsed over the Thanksgiving holiday. Well, they did. It was noticeable, Bob. You were all doing something else that weekend, that was for sure. Rest assured, I, along with your other listener, is now up to date. Good to hear, Bob. Anyway, Bob says, love Darren Hayton's chat about postcards and pamphlets, which we in part featured last week on this show, of course, and the full chat was in the Extra Mile Sunday just gone. I've, says Bob, recently started printing again, and one of the most enjoyable aspects of printing your own pictures is sharing prints with the people therein. Funny how a print is now novel, isn't it? You know, you're right, Bob. You are right. It is a novel thing, isn't it? You're printing? Really? What's printing? Cassette? Dad, what's a cassette? I want to do more printing in 2023 myself, actually, Bob. And a good friend of mine has offered me use of his printer. I would buy my own printer, but I have a very unhealthy relationship with printers. In that I use it a couple of times, and if it's in my house, it suddenly takes on a banding issue. All of them, they all do it. Any colour printer, I'm telling you, any colour printer at all. After a few uses from me, suddenly, banding. I'm thinking, what's that all? How come some people can print beautiful pictures out of their photo printers, but I just get banding? So he's going to help me in the new year. I'll start by making my own surprise postcards for 2023. I think that could be a good project. I like that idea. Regarding Andy Mumford's comments, says Bob, about the business of photography and earning a living within it, I have to say I've been blessed with a career of making pictures. Sure, I don't always get to express myself, but through photography, of which I include videography, I've had the opportunity to practice my image making on somebody else's dime. I've also met many interesting people and learned so much. We, fellow freelancers, would often joke about how there should be some sort of academic degree for the strange arrangement of knowledge we've gleaned from hours of interviews and documentary filming. I just came off a company event in Dallas photographing headshots and event candids. Not the most glamorous work, maybe, but everyone is very appreciative of the work I do. Take note of the attached image. The one in her left hand is for me. That'll be a drink. A wrap beverage as appreciation for me and my magic camera. Good to be wanted. Cheers. Bob of the Desert, Demers. I shall put that picture on the show page today. And you know what? You've reminded me, Bob. I might go a little bit left field here for a second, but bear with me. Of perhaps one of the most precious gifts that my career has brought me, and that's photography and podcast and radio and a bit of TV and videography. And that gift is connection, which is brought by interviewing in particular. And I know of a few portrait photographers in particular who've mooted the very same thing, how we learn about people. We have to problem solve to an extent while we do that learning. All of us, whenever we make a picture of somebody, whether you're doing it for a dime or whether maybe somebody's entrusted you with a family photography for an important event, we're all essentially, by dint of conversation and chatting as we make our pictures, in some way we're kind of interviewing, aren't we? So thanks for your pictures this year, Bob, for your letters that you've sent in, for the fact you haven't yet let a rattlesnake get too close to say hello to you. I'm thankful for that too. And I'd like to play as an inspirational clip. I think I'm going to play something from a portrait photographer from quite some time ago, actually. I'll put the episode number on the show notes when I write them up later on. But this is Scott Goldsmith. I had been talking to Scott about a portrait subject who'd struggled with body image with him. And I think this is one of the magical things that when photographers get this right, can be so precious about what we do. He had led her through the process, or by way of a conversation, to feel more comfortable about being photographed. It was a conversation that entirely changed her approach to how she felt when she was having her photograph made. And I know a few photographers that are very good at doing this. Actually, one of our friends, one of our supporters of the show, Anna McCarthy, and I've mentioned Anna before, she's incredibly good at doing this. I've watched her work when she's talking with those that she photographs, and she builds this amazing rapport with people. It's a skill that I certainly wish I had. But in Scott's case here, I asked him for tips on how you make people feel at ease.
It's going to sound rather simple. I think the best thing right off the bat is to be a good listener. And you combine listening with the body language you're observing. You know, this particular lady, I could tell she was not in a good place when I met her. So I had extra empathy for her. And it's important not to run in there with your cameras if this was a portrait situation. So it was important to engage her and learn a little bit about her and get to know her. The more you know about any given subject or person or what you're photographing, the better you're going to come away with it photographically. So in her case, we talked for a while, and she opened up, and she became, it's fun to look at those shoots later and to see the progression of their expressions and their familiarity and their comfort level as the shoot progresses. By the end of the shoot, you know, she was much more tuned in and comfortable. And if it's a portrait situation, I try my best to spend some time with the person, getting to know them a little bit before I bring out the cameras.
That's Scott Goldsmith, and in his program at the very end of the edition. There's a really surprising story. No spoilers, but if you do get a chance to listen back to that, and if you haven't heard it before, then do follow the link and listen to that conversation with Scott. It was that one, wasn't it? I haven't just sent you off to listen to something that doesn't end the way I think I remember it. No, I'm sure I'm right. If you haven't joined yet our Facebook group, it's a lovely, safe environment and community, and it's another one of those social platforms I want to do more with in 2023. It's a very important place for us because I think it gives a nice, is it a meeting hub or a meeting place for people of like-minded thoughts and their love for making pictures to go and meet and chat and share pictures. And sometimes, quite often actually, the stories that I relay on this podcast start in that Facebook group. So we have a page and we have a group, and it will be wonderful to welcome you in there in 2023. And of course, if you'd like to send in your stories, your thoughts about photography, what you love about it, why it's particularly precious to you, what making pictures brings to you in your life, then I really do want to continue hearing from you in 2023. You make this show, and I sincerely mean that. Send your letters to stories@photowalk.show, stories@photowalk.show. If you are sending pictures, then send in dimension terms, 2,000 pixel wide pictures, please, that we can then pop on the show page. And if you can as well, remember to send me your links to Instagram, Vero, your websites, so that we can do a hearty link back to you as a way of thanks. Right, part 2 of my conversation now with Erin Trieb. We're going to talk about projects, and we're going to talk about the ultimate project, I suppose, that is ourselves. I've read so many letters out this year about why photography is precious to us in terms of providing escape and quiet and solace and many other facets that are mentally balancing. So I want to touch on mental well-being in this part of our conversation. For the people Erin photographs, and indeed for Erin herself, some of what you're about to hear is not necessarily easy listening in any language. And I'd encourage you to visit Erin's website to see the photographs we discuss. I am genuinely in awe of a photographer in a position like Erin's, who realizes that the gift that they have and we have in making pictures is often service. Nearly always, whilst the pictures can show us, because when you make a picture, and guests have discussed this, a little bit of you, or sometimes a lot of bit of you, is in that photograph by way of showing, tone or mood and so on. But I've always thought, and it's a work in progress for me, for sure, that it's what our pictures can bring in the way of service that can be the missing link of the why. Now, of course, I realise that that's a bit deep in terms of sometimes just wanting to go out to make a sketchbook image of some leaves on the floor, as I just have a moment ago, and there's not necessarily a whole lot of service going on in that. But in Erin's case, it's that service to others that makes her such an important narrator of life. And so this is part 2 of my conversation with Erin Trieb.
Let me talk about the voice you give others, since we've sort of moved toward that now, such as the homecoming, which gives those coming back who fought in conflict a chance to share their pictures and their words and very personal thoughts. You've essentially provided them with a canvas, really, haven't you?
Yeah, and I just want to make it clear to your audience members that I don't consider myself someone who gives a voice to the voiceless. I know that's a common term that's used. I like to think that they have their voice and they just need the megaphone, right? And if I can give them a platform, give them a tool to help tell their story, it's really them that's telling the stories, and I'm kind of just the avenue or the vessel through which that's done. At least that's how I view it. So yeah, with the Homecoming Project, that came about after I spent about a year documenting the same platoon. I first photographed them in Afghanistan in 2009, and then when they redeployed back to the United States to their base, which was in Fort Drum, New York. They were a part of the 10th Mountain Division. I followed them to upstate New York to see what their homecoming would be like. And it was then that I realized that this was going to be a huge story.
Yeah.
And it kind of ballooned from there.
Eventually, you involved others in the process, I know, of sharing work that they'd made themselves. But it starts with just this enormous bank of pictures, Erin, and material that you had collected, doesn't it?
Yeah, I had this huge collection of work. I mean, thousands of rolls of film that I'd shot because I was shooting analog for this project. I also started collecting, like, not artifacts, but like materials. So for instance, one soldier I met, and this was all on the military, it was on the US military, and the theme was the effects of war and trauma and PTSD on the military, the US military and veterans, and the rate of increased suicide in the military community. So that was the focus of the project. Because when they redeployed and I went to Fort Drum to continue documenting them, there started to be a spree of homicides and suicides. Every other week, I'd hear about someone I knew that had killed themselves or had tried to harm another person because of the drugs that they were taking that the mental health department gave them to deal with.
Yeah, I know the irony is just shocking, isn't it?
It's disgusting. Yeah, it's really terrible the way that the military was handling a lot of that back then. I think resources have gotten better in the past 10 years, especially with the drawdown of troops in the conflict essentially in Afghanistan and Iraq are over as far as the Western militaries are concerned. But the way that they were dealing with them when they came back, I saw a lot of situations that were not medically sound, that were not medically okay. So that's, where this project sprouted from. And then it grew when I started collecting material. So for instance, there was one soldier that I knew who was on so many different antipsychotic medications that were prescribed to him. Nobody was paying attention to make sure that he was taking them correctly or that they weren't mixed. I mean, these are young kids. This kid was 18, 19 years old. Of course, you're going to go drink and take your meds and not really be conscious of what you're doing or how it can affect you. And he ended up slitting the throat of a fellow soldier on base and woke up in the psychiatric hospital and had no memory or recollection.
He said he blacked out, didn't he? Yeah.
He blacked out. Yeah. He blacked out. And instead of rehabilitating this kid, the military sent him to Fort Leavenworth prison for, I think he was there for like 4 years, serving a sentence for something that he wasn't even conscious that he was doing at the time. And watching this happen, it was absolutely mind-blowing. I still get riled up thinking about it because it was so upsetting.
I can tell, yeah.
It still makes my head spin. But Zach, the soldier, and I began writing letters, and his entire platoon stopped, basically shut him out, stopped communicating with him. He was, basically ostracized. And I just thought, this poor kid, you did this horrific thing and he didn't even remember it. So we started writing letters, and then I realized that letters were like a really important part of the historical documentation of this period of war. So I found letters from mothers that they'd written to their sons.
Wow.
While they were serving overseas. I had letters that mothers wrote to me about the loss of their children who committed suicide when they came back. And so collecting these materials grew into a whole collection of pictures, audio recordings, video recordings, still imagery, and then it became a traveling exhibit. And over the span of 5 years, it exhibited in over 50 exhibitions all over the world. So it was an incredible project.
It seems to me there's a conflict upon the mind that's as damaging for you, actually, as the ones who've been fighting. I wonder how, Erin, do you look after your own mind? What work? You mentioned therapy, 20 years of, by the sound of it, from what you said. But it is important that you look after yourself.
Oh boy, it's important. It's critical. Yeah, I began seeing a therapist when I was 20 because I had a bad college breakup. It was my first boyfriend, and I was very sad. So I started talking to a counselor, and I've had the same therapist since then. So for 20 years.
Wow, what a travel that therapist has almost physically been on, because your life has changed so dramatically. Not that I'm in any way belittling a college breakup, but from college breakups to the witnessing that has occurred over the last 2 decades.
She and I laugh because we laugh about how young I was when I started seeing her, and how she's literally been on every journey with me for 2 decades. She is about to turn 80 years old.
Right.
And we've kind of grown up together in a strange way. She's a bit like my surrogate grandmother. So I love her, and she's wonderful. And I think everyone should have a therapist. I think culturally we used to have tribal elders way back in the day.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
We'd consult for, okay, there was an argument in the tribe or in the village. What should we do? How do we solve this? And we've kind of lost that culturally. And so that's kind of what I think of a good therapist as being like, I got, someone who guides you when things get blurry or you can't make sense of the world.
But your therapist obviously can't be with you in the hotel rooms when the bombs are falling only a couple of miles away. What do you do?
You'd be surprised. I call her when I'm literally on the ground, like, okay, this just happened. Betty, like, what should I do?
But what do you do? Do you go jogging? Do you meditate? I
do.
Right.
I do a lot of things, and to be honest, Neil, and this is personal information, but I'm happy to share it because I think it's important that, we be honest. I literally feel like I lost my mind several times before I found a way to cope with the work that I do and the things that I've seen over the past 10 years of covering conflict. And it's scary when your brain stops working. It's almost like there's been times when I was so overwhelmed that I literally couldn't make thoughts, like coherent thoughts.
Wow.
Yes. And that's terrifying because if the thing that you use to function in the world stops working, how do you survive? How do you
reboot?
Right, exactly. So for me, it's definitely, I would say, I started noticing effects in 2016, and throughout 16, 17, 18, and 19, it was fairly up and down. I hadn't quite figured out what could work for me to maintain any sort of semblance of not just tranquility or peace, but just normalcy. For me, it really happened during the pandemic when I kind of had this awakening at the start. Well, before the pandemic, it was January of 2020. I just thought I've got to do something different because I can't keep living this way. Yeah, I turned to a lot of, I'd always known that meditation was helpful and exercise was helpful, but then I kind of made it an all-encompassing mission to just take care of myself. And that's all I did in 2020. Like I might have worked one assignment. I lived out in my van. I moved into a Toyota Sienna minivan and lived out of it and drove around the country by myself. And I just sat in the woods and prayed to the God of my choice and meditated and went running a lot. And it took about a year for me to get my brain not just back to a level where it was functioning well again, but for me to refine joy. And
I mean, it sounds like the assignment, you had one working assignment, but it sounds like the assignment was you. It was you.
It was, and I didn't even mean for that to happen. It's not like I set out on a a year of self-exploration. It wasn't like that. It was more like I moved from Turkey right when the pandemic was happening. I could have lived with my parents, but I chose to live with a friend on a farm in Virginia. At the start of the pandemic, I didn't have a car. So I thought, okay, well, I need to buy a car. I bought a used minivan. And then I was driving it around and it got late one night. And I thought, well, look, I guess I'll just sleep in it. And then that turned into one night, turned into two, turned into several weeks. And then I ended up living out of it for 3 years.
This sounds like Forrest Gump finding that he just ran 1 mile and then 2 miles and then 10 miles and just carried on running.
I felt like that. I felt like, well, I'll just keep running, But
you did. In a slightly more serious stance, following that, you've been working on a project about women affected by war. Actually, I'm very interested by this because I've spoken to 2 photojournalists in particular about this, Marissa Roth and her 40-year project about women and war and what war does to the women so-called left behind, although I don't think you're ever left behind in this, and more latterly, Lindsay Billing, talking about the stories of life that she makes in Afghanistan. Tell me about your project and tell me about the access that you've had.
Yeah, I began focusing more on women, I would say around my mid-30s. I think before that, in Afghanistan, especially on embeds, my primary focus was the U.S. military and their operations, and that meant that it was the infantry, which at that time did not allow women into the infantry, and so it was all young men, and so that had been, not on purpose, but that was kind of by default the type of people that I've been focusing on. And then I think when I moved to Turkey in 2015, I started just finding all these really beautiful stories about women that were really enriching, and I found that I think because in my 20s, I saw that what I did was a part of the boys club. And so I kind of identified more maybe, with like either a sense of masculinity or males. I'm not exactly sure, but it wasn't until my 30s that I really was like, oh, like women are fucking cool. Like women are awesome. and then I shifted my focus onto women. And so I've covered a lot of women-driven sports. I covered an Iraqi college basketball team in Iraq. I covered...
was the Mountaineers, wasn't there as well?
Yes, the Afghan female Mountaineers. First woman, female Afghan who summited Afghanistan's highest peak. She was the first to climb Mount Noshak, which is 7,500 meter peak, 24,580 feet.
Wow.
Yeah, it was just so enriching spending time with all of these amazing, incredible, dynamic, strong women who had grit. And I don't know. I mean, it was very, it was like a really eye-opening experience to get to do that.
I was fascinated by the YPJ in Syria, a feared outfit, particularly by the ISIS fighters who maintained they would not go to heaven if they were killed by a female fighter.
Man, that still to date is one of my favorite stories I've ever covered. It was the most surreal experience to be on the border of Iraq and Syria when ISIS was, less than a mile away, embedded with this guerrilla communist, tough female fighting group. Yeah, it was wild.
But you made portraits and you did photojournalism. There was a real mix in terms of the work that you presented from that. What was it like living with them day by day, 24 hours a day?
Oh, it was wonderful. They were the perfect subjects because they were so focused on their mission that they completely ignored me, which is a dream, for a photojournalist to be the fly on the wall. And living with them was great. Just being in their environment, being like plopped in the center of this intense conflict that they were risking their lives for every day, and getting to see how they coped and went about their daily lives was absolutely fascinating. Yeah.
Are you planning to go back to Ukraine? We've got the anniversary of the invasion. It was surreal. I was in Norway on a skiing holiday. things that you remember, the first place where the place where you first hear the news of something. I remember coming in for a cup of hot coffee and hearing that it had started, thinking, I didn't think this would happen for one moment. Me too. I mean, I was there when the invasion happened, and I went to Ukraine initially on a hunch. I talked to my colleagues who were there, most of whom said, there's no way it'll happen, but come if you want, but we're not expecting Ukraine to actually get invaded. No.
And after about a week of being there, I woke up that morning on February 24th and saw on my phone that it had happened. And and then it just became a pretty wild ride after that. But to answer your question, I am planning to go back for the anniversary, actually. So I'll be there in the February of 2023.
I would imagine many people would have been hoping that it would be over by then.
That was the talk back when it started. Yeah. A lot of people were saying, well, it depends on who you talk to. Some people would say, oh, give it 3 months, Russia will withdraw. Other people said, no, this is going to go on for who knows how long. And I think the Ukrainians especially knew that it wouldn't end soon because they had experienced conflict since 2014 in the East. So they all said, this is not necessarily new. Our country's been at war with Russia, but nobody's really been paying attention until now.
I watch the news and I look at pictures. I listen to those talking on radio. I'm forever moved by people's ability to live and thrive in complete chaos. And I have one word. It's a question. I don't suppose there will ever be an answer to this one word, but I'm going to try it with you. I kind of asked the question at the start, but I feel like we've been on I know it's an overused phrase, a journey. Not the sort of journey that you've spent with your therapist, having said that, across 20 years, but I feel we've had a journey. I do want to ask you one word. Why?
It's never been a question for me. It's just, I feel like if I wasn't doing this type of work, I would be completely lost.
Yeah.
Like what you said at the beginning, I don't remember saying, I think I do remember saying, if you can, then do. It is my mantra.
Well, I hope you did, because it's down as your mantra. I've researched you.
Where did you see that?
I don't know, but I've read a lot about you. You must have said it at some stage.
I think I did say it. Yeah. It's funny hearing myself being quoted, but it's true.
I've written your book jacket.
You've done a really good job.
Yeah, so you still have to answer why, though.
When I write my first book, I think you'll have to write the foreword for me.
That would be my honor.
I would say to answer the why, I do it because I believe in it. And so why do I believe in it? I guess you have to believe in something. This is what I believe in. I mean, for me, it's not about the career or the job. It's kind of a way of life. If I wasn't a photojournalist, I might be doing some sort of research on conflict, where I go to areas of conflict and report in some other capacity about what's happening on the ground, either for an NGO or some sort of social work. So yeah, for me, it's almost like it's in my bones. I almost feel like I don't have a choice. I've also been fired from every other job that I've had besides being a photojournalist. So maybe it's the only thing I can do.
Erin Trieb. For links to Erin and other photographers you've heard from or about today, Instagrams and their Veros and websites that we've mentioned, go to today's show page, which is episode 360. I'm having to... this is interesting. Parts of I've gone off the beaten track slightly here. I'm trying to find my way back through woodland. I'm not sure the path continues. Bitterly cold. Hand warmers next week. Hand warmers. Yes, so episode 360, and you'll find links to all that we've mentioned today. And of course, you can find it through the app as well, that link, which I understand last week, completely my error. We had the wrong link for at least 24, maybe 48 hours. So humble apologies. I will, attention to detail, I will make sure that that's correct this week. Go to the app in your podcast player and you'll find the link in there to the show page as well. Sunday's Extra Mile features, when it gets a little bit personal actually, 3 images from the year that say 2022. And as I said, I want to talk more about mental health with Erin, a special story that, we both share. Our play-out song's starting to roll, so let's introduce our PS for this week. I want to play you something very special indeed. Some closing thoughts from my guest today, from Erin Trieb, that I think are possibly the most encouraging we've had as a play-out. Certainly personal and certainly not expected. Just as we were saying goodbye.
I did want to share one more thing before we go. I just wanted to say, on the note of mental health, to anyone who's listening to your podcast, for years I thought that my brain couldn't be fixed or healed, and I was wrong. And I, with the support of a lot of people and resources, I not only healed my brain, but I found new sources of joy and peace that I didn't ever think could be possible. And so I just, I want to encourage your audience members that if anyone's listening and they do feel overwhelmed by anxiety and stress or hopelessness, especially, I know that can happen around the holidays. I want to encourage them to reach out and call a loved one, call, a hotline, a counselor, just someone that they can talk to, because there is so much goodness in this life. And when you're suffering and all you can see is, that black veil, you can't really conceive the idea that things will get better, but they do, and they can. And, they did for me, and I'm so lucky. I find joy and gratitude and peace every day now. And it took a lot of work, but I'm here and I did it, and I'm so happy that I was able to find that and keep doing the work that I love to do.
In the smoky light and in the rain, working through the night and through the haze. You lay it down each day with heavy eyes, just to wake again, just as tired. So may every morning find the mercy new, and light enough to shine upon the fallow fields. I can see your heart beneath the dirt. You put your weary hands into the work, a needle and a thread to mend the seams, a heartbeat and a breath to plant the seed. So may every morning find the mercy new, and light enough to shine upon the fallow fields. So may every blossom break into ride through it all. So may every morning find the mercy new, and light enough to shine upon the fallow fields. So may every blossom break into the day, up from underneath the gravel and the clay. Until the first gives way unto the last. For gardens in the spring, miles of green, to see the seasons heal, the years redeemed, and we will walk these hills like before, and what was sown in tears will reap with joy.
Andrew Wordsfield. I do so love his voice, and he does make a great play-out song to walk to. And that's it for this week. My thanks to Erin once again, to Kieran Doherty and Scott Goldsmith as well, mpb.com, and our extra milers. I shall talk to you on Sunday. Next week, my guest is Alexander Ward, and we will be talking about his wild water swimming project and plans for the year ahead. Music today is from the wonderful artslist.io. Final fist bumps as ever to Neil Ford, head of all that stuff I just simply don't get. Emily Renier for your eyes in our Facebook group, and Andrea Gilpin, who is Chief of Staff on the Instagram Vero and Ideas floor. I look forward to photographing with you, hearing from you and talking with you for the last one of the year next week.
Ooh, car. Yes. Put on the heated steering wheel, would you? I'm coming back.
I can't do that.
Why is that?
It's not very environmentally sound, is it? What would Greta say?
True enough, but it's the only luxury I have in life right now. I am literally freezing. As who was it that said, I'm going outside. I might be sometime.
Oh, it's not that bad.
It is. Freezing. I'm freezing.
Stop blathering.
Oh, don't you start.
The Photowalk is a Loading Zone production.